Berserk's 363rd chapter recently dropped, and I'd like to share some of my thoughts on it. I've been a fan of this series for a long time, and it looks like we could potentially be seeing the build-up to the final arc of the series within the next 10 years or so. Any fan of this long-running manga knows just how much waiting comes with following the series. We've been drip-fed content for multiple decades now, but with the last few chapters and their implications on the lore, it does feel as if we're trudging towards some form of endgame. Trudging being the key word here. This chapter was unfortunately held back from greatness by what has always, for me, been the absolute worst aspect of the series, its comic relief segments. It'll vary from person to person, but in my opinion, Isidro is the most irritating character in the whole story, and throughout all of my experience reading this series, I've only grown to dislike the character more and more as the plot progresses. Comedic elements in anime and manga have always infuriated me for many years, and the downright cringe fest featured in this chapter was extremely disheartening to see, especially after the 3-month wait between chapters. I fully respect Miura's decision to inject levity into the world of Berserk, considering how dark and depressing it can be. And for someone reading this whole series down the line, it probably won't be as irritating due to how quickly these chapters can be read. But as someone who has been following the series for ages now, the comedic elements of Berserk fall absolutely flat and continue to undermine its darker, serious tone, which is exactly what made me fall in love with the anime and manga in the first place. The thematic depth and genuine human emotion found in Berserk absolutely trumps most anime and manga for me personally, which are primarily geared at a teenage audience. In my opinion, comedy that's handled in a more authentic, nuanced manner is far better at connecting with an audience than throwing in some unnecessary filler with childlike humour in it, which is even more annoying in a story like Berserk. It's also especially infuriating when comparing Isidro and Puck with a character like Corcus from the Golden Age arc, whose comedic relief felt far more natural and less like a campy anime trying too hard to make you laugh. When humour is utilised well, it can really generate a sense of deep empathy and relatability that helps to alleviate the pain of the darker moments, much like in real life or any well-written story. But reading the Isidro filler in this chapter really hit home just how little I actually care for the character and all of the comedy in the series post-Golden Age arc. It was really jarring for me as an early time reader going from the Golden Age arc to the Black Swordsman and seeing just how terribly the humour was actually executed. Although this is all taste based in my opinion, you may enjoy it, and for you I'm actually quite jealous because this whole series is bogged down by it in my opinion, and I would love to enjoy more aspects of it. It's gotten to a point now where whenever I reread Berserk I mostly skip anything involving Puck and Isidro, as the tone is so jarring and frankly annoying for me that it hurts the flow of the story. However, this isn't to say that all of it is bad. Whilst reading the manga, many of Puck's interactions with Guts during the Black Swordsman arc are relatively well woven into the theme of Guts accepting this newer, darker world through his playful relationship with Puck. But personally speaking, the execution has always come off as sloppy to me, and I feel many of the elements Isidro and Puck add to the series could be pulled off in a far more nuanced way. But at the end of the day, I can fully admit that this is purely taste-based, and that realistically I'm just not a fan of the way Japanese writers handle comedy in the majority of works I've consumed from them. It comes off as immensely tacky and childish to me, and in a series like Berserk it can really deflate the fantastically disturbing tone. In my opinion, Isidro really shouldn't still feature in this story. His role worked relatively well in some aspects up to the end of the Conviction arc, which is where I think Miura should have left him. But his continuous inclusion in the story has really bogged down the serious thematic depth of the series and drowned out many of the things about Berserk that I read the series for, such as world building. This chapter was a particularly egregious example of all that. But with all that rambling out of the way, it's worth mentioning that there were positive aspects to this chapter, as there are throughout all of Berserk. No matter how bad and cringy the comedy gets, there's plenty more good, juicy content to indulge in. Every time a new chapter releases, I'm reminded of everything I really do love about Berserk. That being the incredible attention to detail in the art and the myriad of ways one can interpret the events of the story, unlike in most anime where the plot is literally just shoved in your face and there isn't much interpreting to be done. It also seems like the drawing has drastically improved. There's been some major developments in the detail of the art since Miura began to draw the manga digitally, which was initially jarring at first. The return of the Moonlight Boy as well is definitely a signal that there are some serious events lined up in the next few chapters for Berserk. The evidence that this character is some form of avatar that Griffith possesses has been stacking up for a while now, and the cliffhanger ending to this chapter is definitely teasing us with another long-awaited conflict between Guts and him. I mean, what has it been, like 20 years since the last one? Also, the parallels drawn between the Skull Knight and Guts were great to read. There's an extremely fascinating symbiotic relationship between the two, and any development in this area is always refreshing to see. But finally, my favourite part of this chapter had to be Gedfring addressing the inner rage that still burns inside Guts, and whether it will give him a new lease of life or be the fire that consumes him. This is the exact sort of stuff I read Berserk for, and it was amazing to see. It's just a shame that there was such a small slither of it for now. But when thinking in the big picture of the manga, less is definitely more in this case, and somebody reading this as a whole rather than keeping up to date with it in chapters will absolutely appreciate more quiet moments like this. I'm extremely excited to see where this story goes, and hopefully I'm still alive by the time it ends.